Pain rarely announces itself with urgency or clarity. Instead, it enters quietly, almost imperceptibly, blending into the background of everyday life where it is easily overlooked. It begins in moments so subtle they seem insignificant: a slight hesitation before responding to someone, a faint tightness in the chest that disappears as quickly as it came, or a passing thought that suggests something is not quite right but is immediately dismissed. These small signals rarely command attention because the rhythm of life encourages constant movement, constant distraction, and constant productivity. People are conditioned to keep going, to push through discomfort, to treat emotional unease as something temporary or unimportant. In doing so, they unknowingly train themselves to ignore the earliest whispers of pain. This quiet neglect becomes the fertile ground where deeper struggles take root, as each dismissed feeling does not vanish but instead settles beneath the surface of awareness. Over time, these suppressed moments accumulate, layering upon one another in ways that are not immediately visible but gradually begin to influence perception and behavior. What makes this beginning so deceptive is that it does not feel like a beginning at all. It feels like nothing, like something too small to matter, when in reality it is the first step in a process that slowly shapes the inner world. Pain, in its earliest form, is not loud or overwhelming. It is patient, waiting in silence, growing stronger in the absence of acknowledgement, and quietly preparing to make itself known in ways that can no longer be ignored. The human mind is remarkably adaptive, capable of developing patterns that protect it from immediate discomfort, even if those patterns create deeper challenges over time. Emotional suppression is one of these patterns, often formed without conscious intention but reinforced through repeated experience. When a person feels hurt but chooses not to express it, or experiences fear but distracts themselves instead of confronting it, they are engaging in a process that feels like control but is actually avoidance. Psychological research has shown that emotions that are not processed do not simply fade away, they remain active within the subconscious, continuing to influence thoughts, reactions, and decisions in subtle but powerful ways. This internal activity often goes unnoticed because it does not always present itself directly. Instead, it emerges indirectly, through irritability that seems disproportionate to the situation, through fatigue that cannot be explained by physical exertion, or through a persistent sense of unease that lingers without a clear source. These manifestations are often misunderstood, leading individuals to search for external explanations while overlooking the internal buildup that is driving them. The mind, seeking to maintain stability, reinforces avoidance by offering temporary relief whenever discomfort is ignored, creating a cycle that becomes increasingly difficult to break. Over time, this cycle shapes the way a person interacts with their emotions, teaching them that it is safer to suppress than to feel, even though this safety is only an illusion that comes at a growing cost. In everyday life, the silent beginning of pain can be observed in situations that feel ordinary and familiar, making it even more difficult to recognize. It appears in the student who feels overwhelmed by expectations but continues to push forward without rest, convincing themselves that stopping would mean failure. It exists in the employee who feels undervalued and unappreciated but chooses to remain silent to avoid conflict or instability, burying frustration beneath forced composure. It lives within relationships where small disappointments are ignored in the name of maintaining harmony, where unspoken feelings slowly create distance between individuals who once felt close. In each of these scenarios, the initial discomfort is manageable, almost negligible, but the decision to ignore it allows it to grow in the background. Over time, these unacknowledged emotions begin to shape behavior in subtle ways, leading to withdrawal, defensiveness, or a quiet dissatisfaction that cannot easily be explained. What makes this process particularly deceptive is its gradual nature, as there is no single moment where everything changes, only a slow progression that shifts the emotional landscape. By the time the effects become noticeable, the underlying pain has already become deeply embedded, influencing thoughts and actions in ways that feel natural but are actually the result of long-term suppression. This is how pain begins to take form, not through sudden events, but through the quiet accumulation of moments that were never fully acknowledged. As this hidden pain continues to build beneath awareness, it begins to reshape the way a person perceives themselves and the world around them. Subconscious stress grows steadily, altering thought patterns and reinforcing beliefs that are often negative or limiting. A person who repeatedly ignores their emotional experiences may begin to internalize the idea that their feelings are unimportant, leading to a diminished sense of self-worth and an increased tendency towards self-doubt. Cognitive patterns such as overthinking, emotional numbness, and heightened sensitivity to stress often emerge from this unresolved tension, creating a mental environment that feels heavy and difficult to navigate. Scientific research suggests that prolonged emotional suppression can keep the body's stress response system activated for extended periods, even in the absence of immediate threats, resulting in a state of chronic tension that affects both mental and physical well-being. This ongoing activation can manifest in various ways, including anxiety, burnout, difficulty concentrating, and physical symptoms such as headaches or fatigue. The individual may feel disconnected from their own emotions, unable to identify what they are truly feeling or why they feel the way they do. This disconnection is not a sign of absence but of accumulation, as the emotions that were once ignored continue to exist beneath the surface, influencing every aspect of experience without being fully understood or acknowledged. Recognizing the silent beginning of pain requires a shift in awareness that goes against deeply ingrained habits of avoidance and suppression. It involves learning to notice the small signals that are often dismissed, the fleeting emotions and subtle discomforts that arise in everyday moments. Emotional awareness is not about intensifying pain or dwelling on negativity, but about creating space to understand what is being experienced before it grows into something overwhelming. When a person allows themselves to pause, to reflect, and to listen without judgment, they begin to break the cycle that has kept their pain hidden for so long. They start to see that pain is not an enemy to be avoided, but a form of communication that reveals important truths about their inner world, including unmet needs, unresolved experiences, and underlying conflicts. By acknowledging these messages early, it becomes possible to respond with clarity and intention, preventing the buildup that leads to deeper emotional struggles. This process requires patience and honesty, as well as the willingness to face discomfort rather than escape it. Yet within this willingness lies the potential for transformation, as the quiet voice of pain, once heard and understood, shifts from being a source of confusion and distress into a guide that leads toward greater self-awareness, resilience, and genuine strength. There comes a moment when the quiet accumulation of pain, once ignored and pushed aside, can no longer remain contained, and what once felt manageable begins to collapse under its own weight. This breaking point does not arrive suddenly, even though it may feel that way in the moment. It is the result of countless suppressed emotions, unresolved thoughts, and prolonged stress that have been building beneath awareness for far too long. At first, the mind adapts, stretching its capacity to endure, convincing itself that everything is under control, that it can handle just a little more. But like any system pushed beyond its limits, there comes a threshold where endurance transforms into overload. Emotional signals grow louder, thoughts become heavier, and even small challenges begin to feel overwhelming. The person who once managed to hold everything together now finds themselves struggling to maintain even the simplest sense of balance. This is the moment when everything starts to fall apart, not because of a single event, but because the weight of everything unprocessed finally demands attention. It is not a failure of strength, but the natural consequence of carrying too much for too long without release or recognition. As emotional overload intensifies, the mind and body begin to show clear signs of exhaustion, revealing the true cost of prolonged suppression. Thoughts that were once organized become chaotic, racing uncontrollably or slowing down to a fog-like state where clarity feels out of reach. Concentration weakens, decision-making becomes difficult, and even routine tasks begin to feel draining. This is not simply tiredness, it is mental exhaustion at a deeper level, often described in psychology as burnout, where the brain's capacity to cope with stress becomes depleted. The nervous system, having remained in a prolonged state of alertness, begins to falter, leading to heightened anxiety, irritability, or complete emotional shutdown. Some individuals may experience sudden emotional outbursts, while others may feel nothing at all, as if disconnected from their own experiences. Both reactions stem from the same root, a system overwhelmed beyond its capacity to regulate itself effectively. This stage can feel frightening, as the loss of control challenges a person's sense of identity and stability, making them question their own resilience and ability to cope. In this state of collapse, the illusion of control that once held everything together begins to unravel, exposing the depth of what has been hidden beneath the surface. A person may find themselves reacting in ways that feel unfamiliar, snapping at small inconveniences, withdrawing from others, or breaking down unexpectedly without a clear reason. These reactions are often misunderstood, both by the individual and those around them, as signs of weakness or instability. However, psychological truth suggests otherwise, as breakdowns are not signs of failure but natural responses to overwhelming stress. The brain, when pushed beyond its limits, shifts into survival mode, prioritizing immediate relief over long-term control. This can result in emotional release, whether through tears, anger, or complete shutdown, as the mind attempts to discharge the accumulated tension. What feels like losing control is, in many ways, the body's attempt to regain balance after prolonged strain. It is a corrective response, not a destructive one, even though it may feel chaotic and uncomfortable in the moment. Understanding this process changes the way a breaking point is perceived, transforming it from something to fear into something to recognize as part of the human experience. Every individual has limits, and those limits are not signs of weakness but indicators of humanity. Chronic stress, when left unaddressed, gradually erodes emotional resilience, making it increasingly difficult to maintain stability. Studies on stress and burnout reveal that the brain cannot sustain high levels of pressure indefinitely without consequences, as prolonged exposure to stress hormones affects both mental and physical functioning. When the breaking point arrives, it serves as a signal that something within needs attention, adjustment, and care. Ignoring this signal only deepens the imbalance, while acknowledging it creates the opportunity for recovery. This shift in perspective is crucial, as it removes the stigma surrounding emotional collapse and replaces it with understanding. Instead of viewing breakdowns as personal failures, they can be seen as moments of truth, revealing what has been neglected and what must now be addressed. Recovering from a breaking point is not about instantly rebuilding strength, but about slowly restoring balance with patience and awareness. The first step is often the simplest yet the most difficult, allowing oneself to pause without judgment, to accept that rest is not weakness but necessity. Releasing the pressure to immediately regain control creates space for the mind and body to begin resetting. Practical steps such as reducing external demands, reconnecting with supportive individuals, and engaging in grounding activities can help stabilize the nervous system. Emotional processing, whether through reflection, conversation, or journaling, allows the suppressed experiences to surface in a manageable way, preventing them from continuing to build beneath awareness. Over time, as the mind begins to recover, clarity returns, and with it comes a deeper understanding of personal limits and needs. This understanding becomes the foundation for lasting resilience, as it teaches not only how to endure pain, but how to recognize it early and respond in healthier ways. In this sense, the breaking point is not the end of strength, but the beginning of a more honest and sustainable form of it. There is a quiet but profound truth that often goes unnoticed in the human experience, and that truth is this: the more one resists pain, the more deeply it takes hold. Resistance feels natural, almost instinctive, because the mind is designed to protect, to avoid discomfort, to seek safety at all costs. When pain arises, whether emotional or mental, the immediate reaction is to push it away, to distract, to deny, or to suppress. Yet this very act of resistance creates tension, a kind of internal friction where the mind is fighting against what already exists. Instead of dissolving, the pain becomes amplified, not necessarily in intensity at first, but in persistence. Psychological understanding suggests that what we resist tends to remain, because resistance keeps the mind fixated on the very thing it wishes to escape. The energy spent in avoidance does not eliminate the feeling, it sustains it, feeding it through constant attention and rejection. This is why suppressed emotions often resurface, sometimes stronger than before, because they were never allowed to move through naturally. Pain, when resisted, becomes something rigid, something trapped, and over time, it builds pressure within the mind. In contrast, when pain is allowed to exist without immediate judgment or reaction, it begins to lose its grip. Acceptance does not mean liking the pain or agreeing with it, it means acknowledging its presence without adding layers of struggle on top of it. In this subtle shift, the experience begins to change, not because the pain disappears instantly, but because the inner conflict surrounding it begins to dissolve. Acceptance, at its core, is an act of awareness rather than surrender, a conscious decision to face what is present without the need to control or alter it immediately. From a psychological perspective, acceptance is closely tied to emotional regulation and mindfulness, both of which emphasize observing internal experiences without becoming overwhelmed by them. When a person allows themselves to notice their emotions as they arise, without labeling them as good or bad, they create a space between the feeling and their reaction to it. This space is where clarity begins to form. Instead of being consumed by the emotion, the individual becomes an observer of it, recognizing patterns, understanding triggers, and gaining insight into what lies beneath the surface. Mindfulness practices teach that emotions are temporary states, not permanent conditions, and that by observing them without resistance, they naturally shift and change over time. This does not eliminate pain, but it transforms the relationship with it. The individual is no longer fighting against their experience but is instead learning from it. This shift reduces the intensity of emotional suffering because it removes the added burden of judgment, fear, and avoidance. In this state of awareness, pain becomes less overwhelming, not because it is smaller, but because it is no longer being resisted with the same force. Sitting with pain, however, is not an abstract concept, it is a practical skill that can be developed through intentional effort and patience. One of the simplest ways to begin is by bringing attention to the present moment, noticing the physical sensations associated with emotional discomfort. Instead of escaping into distractions, a person can pause and observe where the pain is felt in the body, perhaps as tension in the chest, heaviness in the shoulders, or a knot in the stomach. By focusing on these sensations without trying to change them, the mind begins to anchor itself in awareness rather than avoidance. Slow, steady breathing can further support this process, calming the nervous system and creating a sense of stability even in the presence of discomfort. Another practical approach is journaling, where thoughts and emotions are expressed without censorship, allowing the mind to release what it has been holding on to. Naming emotions accurately also plays a crucial role, as research shows that labeling feelings can reduce their intensity by engaging the brain's regulatory systems. These practices do not eliminate pain instantly, but they create a pathway for it to move through the system rather than remain stuck. Over time, the individual becomes more comfortable with the presence of discomfort, recognizing that it can be experienced without being controlled by it. As acceptance deepens, a noticeable shift begins to occur within the inner landscape of the mind. The constant tension that once accompanied pain starts to ease, replaced by a sense of openness and curiosity. Inner conflict, which arises from the struggle between wanting to feel differently and the reality of what is being felt, begins to diminish. This reduction in conflict is significant because much of human suffering does not come from pain itself, but from the resistance to it. When the mind stops fighting against its own experience, it frees up energy that was previously consumed by that struggle. This energy can then be redirected toward understanding, growth, and healing. Clarity emerges not as a sudden revelation, but as a gradual unfolding, where patterns become visible and insights begin to form naturally. The individual may start to recognize the deeper causes of their pain, whether rooted in unmet needs, unresolved experiences, or ingrained beliefs. This understanding creates a sense of empowerment, as it shifts the focus from avoidance to awareness. In this state, pain is no longer something to escape, but something to explore, a signal that carries valuable information about the self. Embracing the storm of pain does not mean that the storm disappears, but it changes the way it is experienced, transforming it from something overwhelming into something manageable. Acceptance becomes a form of strength, not because it removes discomfort, but because it allows the individual to remain steady within it. Over time, this steadiness builds resilience, as the mind learns that it can endure difficult emotions without being consumed by them. The fear of pain begins to lessen, replaced by a quiet confidence in one's ability to face whatever arises. This does not make life free of challenges, but it changes the response to them, creating a more balanced and grounded way of living. Practical consistency in mindfulness, emotional awareness, and self-reflection reinforces this transformation, making acceptance not just a concept, but a lived experience. In this way, pain loses its power to dominate, not because it is gone, but because it is no longer resisted. The storm may still pass through, but it no longer destroys everything in its path. Instead, it becomes part of a natural cycle, one that, when embraced, leads to deeper understanding, greater peace, and a more authentic connection with oneself. Suffering has a way of slowing life down in ways nothing else can, forcing attention toward what is usually ignored in the rush of everyday existence. It interrupts patterns, breaks routines, and brings awareness to the surface, often in moments when a person would rather look away. In comfort, the mind tends to drift, operating on autopilot, making decisions without much reflection, but in suffering, that autopilot is disrupted. Every thought feels louder, every emotion more vivid, every reaction more noticeable. This heightened awareness is not accidental, it is a natural response to discomfort, a way for the mind to signal that something requires attention. Pain draws focus inward, revealing patterns that were once hidden beneath distraction. A person begins to notice how they react under pressure, how they speak to themselves in moments of difficulty, and how their past experiences shape their current perceptions. This awareness, though often uncomfortable, is one of the most valuable lessons suffering provides. It creates an opportunity to understand oneself on a deeper level, to see not just what is happening externally, but how it is being processed internally. Without this awareness, growth remains limited, as it is difficult to change what is not fully understood. Suffering, in this sense, becomes a mirror, reflecting the inner world with clarity that comfort rarely offers, making it possible to recognize patterns, question assumptions, and begin the process of meaningful change. Patience is another lesson that emerges through hardship, not as an abstract idea, but as a necessity that is learned through experience. In moments of pain, the desire for immediate relief is strong, yet reality often does not accommodate that desire. Healing, whether emotional or psychological, does not follow a fixed timeline, and this lack of control can be deeply frustrating. It is in this frustration that patience begins to take form, not as passive waiting, but as an active process of enduring without forcing outcomes. A person learns that not everything can be solved instantly, that some things require time to unfold, and that pushing too hard for resolution can sometimes create more tension rather than relief. This lesson is reinforced through repeated experiences, where attempts to rush the process lead to setbacks, while allowing space for gradual progress leads to more sustainable change. Psychological studies on resilience suggest that individuals who develop patience are better equipped to handle stress, as they are less likely to react impulsively and more likely to approach challenges with a balanced perspective. Over time, patience becomes less about waiting for circumstances to change and more about maintaining stability within oneself, even when external situations remain uncertain. This shift transforms the experience of suffering from something to escape into something that can be navigated with greater calm and understanding. Emotional intelligence is perhaps one of the most profound outcomes of enduring difficult experiences, as suffering creates the conditions necessary for deeper emotional understanding. When everything feels easy, there is little incentive to examine emotions closely, but when discomfort arises, the need to understand those emotions becomes unavoidable. A person begins to recognize the difference between surface reactions and underlying feelings, learning to identify not just what they feel, but why they feel it. This process involves observing emotional patterns, understanding triggers, and recognizing how past experiences influence present responses. Over time, this awareness extends beyond oneself, allowing for greater empathy toward others, as personal struggles provide insight into the complexity of human emotion. Psychological research supports the idea that individuals who have faced and processed hardship often develop stronger emotional regulation skills, as they have learned to navigate intense feelings without being overwhelmed by them. This does not mean that suffering automatically leads to emotional intelligence, but rather that it creates the opportunity for it, depending on how the experience is approached. When a person chooses to reflect rather than avoid, to understand rather than suppress, suffering becomes a powerful teacher, shaping the ability to respond to emotions with clarity and intention rather than reactivity. Difficult experiences also play a crucial role in shaping the way a person thinks and makes decisions, often leading to more thoughtful and deliberate choices over time. In the absence of hardship, decisions may be made quickly, based on convenience or habit, without much consideration of long-term consequences. However, when a person has faced the outcomes of past choices, particularly those that led to pain, they begin to approach future decisions with greater awareness. Patterns become clearer, and the connection between actions and consequences becomes more apparent. This shift encourages a more reflective approach, where decisions are no longer made solely on impulse, but are guided by a deeper understanding of what truly matters. Real-life patterns show that individuals who have navigated significant challenges often develop a stronger sense of priorities, as hardship forces them to distinguish between what is essential and what is not. They become more cautious in situations that once seemed trivial, more intentional in their actions, and more mindful of the impact their choices have on themselves and others. This evolution in thinking is not about avoiding risk altogether, but about making decisions with greater awareness and responsibility, using past experiences as a guide rather than a limitation. Ultimately, the lessons hidden within suffering are not always immediately visible, as they often reveal themselves gradually, through reflection and time. In the moment of pain, it is difficult to see anything beyond the discomfort, but as distance is gained, patterns begin to emerge, and the meaning behind the experience becomes clearer. A person may look back and recognize how a difficult period led to increased self-awareness, stronger patience, and a deeper understanding of emotions, even if it did not feel that way at the time. This realization does not diminish the difficulty of the experience, but it reframes it, allowing it to be seen as part of a larger process of growth. Psychological insight suggests that meaning-making is a key component of resilience, as individuals who are able to find purpose or lessons in their struggles are more likely to adapt and move forward. This does not mean that suffering is necessary for growth, but it does mean that when suffering occurs, it carries the potential for transformation. By choosing to reflect on the experience, to learn from it, and to integrate its lessons into future actions, a person can turn what once felt like a setback into a source of strength. In this way, suffering becomes more than just pain, it becomes a teacher, offering insights that shape not only who a person becomes, but how they navigate the world with greater wisdom and understanding. Pain, when experienced deeply and honestly, has the capacity to ignite something powerful within the human mind, something that often remains dormant in comfort and ease. It acts as a form of internal resistance, a force that challenges existing limits and demands adaptation. At first, pain feels like something to escape, something that threatens stability and control, but over time, it reveals itself as a catalyst for transformation. The mind, when faced with repeated challenges, begins to adjust, building resilience in response to pressure much like a muscle strengthens under strain. Psychological research supports the concept of stress adaptation, where moderate levels of stress, when processed effectively, enhance an individual's ability to cope with future challenges. This process, often referred to as stress inoculation, suggests that exposure to difficulty, rather than weakening a person, can actually prepare them for greater demands ahead. Pain forces the mind to develop new strategies, to think differently, to become more flexible and resourceful. It strips away illusions of control and comfort, replacing them with a deeper, more grounded sense of capability. Over time, what once felt overwhelming begins to feel manageable, not because the challenges have become easier, but because the individual has become stronger. This is the fire within, a quiet but powerful force that grows each time a person faces discomfort instead of avoiding it, each time they endure rather than escape, gradually transforming pain into a source of inner strength that cannot easily be broken. Resilience is not something that appears suddenly, it is built through repeated exposure to difficulty and the willingness to continue despite discomfort. Each moment of struggle, each instance of pushing through emotional or mental resistance, contributes to the development of this resilience. The brain, through its natural ability to adapt, begins to rewire itself in response to these experiences, strengthening neural pathways associated with problem-solving, emotional regulation, and perseverance. This process, known in neuroscience as neuroplasticity, highlights the brain's capacity to change and grow based on experience. When a person consistently faces challenges rather than avoiding them, the brain learns that discomfort is not a threat but a signal for growth. This shift in perception is crucial, as it changes the way future challenges are approached. Instead of being met with fear or avoidance, they are approached with a sense of readiness and confidence. Real-life patterns show that individuals who have faced and overcome significant hardships often develop a stronger sense of self-efficacy, believing in their ability to handle whatever comes their way. This belief is not based on blind optimism, but on lived experience, on the knowledge that they have endured before and can endure again. In this way, pain becomes a teacher, reinforcing the understanding that strength is not the absence of struggle, but the ability to move through it with determination and clarity. Discomfort, though often unwelcome, plays a critical role in pushing individuals beyond their current limitations, creating opportunities for growth that would not exist in its absence. Growth, by its very nature, requires change, and change is rarely comfortable. When everything feels easy, there is little incentive to adapt or improve, but when discomfort arises, it creates a tension that demands resolution. This tension becomes a driving force, encouraging individuals to seek new solutions, develop new skills, and expand their perspectives. Psychological theories of growth suggest that challenges create a state of cognitive dissonance, where existing beliefs or abilities are no longer sufficient, prompting the mind to adjust in order to restore balance. This adjustment leads to learning, to improvement, and ultimately to a stronger, more capable version of oneself. In everyday life, this can be seen in individuals who use setbacks as opportunities to reassess their approach, who turn failures into lessons, and who allow difficult experiences to refine their thinking rather than diminish their confidence. Discomfort, in this sense, is not an obstacle to growth but a necessary component of it, a signal that change is taking place. By embracing this discomfort rather than resisting it, individuals can harness its energy, using it as a source of motivation to move forward rather than a reason to retreat. Harnessing pain as motivation requires a shift in mindset, a conscious decision to reinterpret discomfort as a signal of progress rather than a sign of failure. This shift begins with awareness, recognizing that the feeling of struggle often accompanies meaningful effort and growth. One practical strategy is to set clear, purposeful goals that align with personal values, using pain as a reminder of what is at stake and why the effort matters. When discomfort arises, instead of viewing it as a barrier, it can be reframed as evidence that one is moving beyond their comfort zone, engaging in the very process that leads to improvement. Another approach involves breaking challenges into manageable steps, allowing progress to be made gradually while maintaining a sense of control and direction. Reflection also plays a key role, as taking time to understand past experiences of pain and how they contributed to growth reinforces the connection between struggle and strength. Additionally, developing routines that support mental and emotional well-being, such as regular physical activity, mindful breathing, or journaling, can help regulate the stress response, making it easier to navigate discomfort without becoming overwhelmed. These strategies do not eliminate pain, but they transform the way it is experienced, turning it from something to avoid into something that can be used intentionally to drive progress and resilience. Ultimately, The fire within is not something that exists independently of pain, but something that is fueled by it, shaped and strengthened through every challenge faced and every obstacle overcome. It is the result of a continuous process of adaptation, learning, and growth, where each experience of discomfort contributes to a deeper sense of capability and resilience. Over time, this inner strength becomes a defining characteristic, influencing not only how challenges are handled but how life itself is approached. A person who has learned to harness pain as a source of strength no longer fears difficulty in the same way, as they understand that within each challenge lies the potential for growth. This understanding creates a sense of empowerment, a confidence that is not easily shaken by external circumstances. It does not mean that pain becomes enjoyable or that challenges lose their intensity, but it does mean that they are no longer seen as purely negative experiences. Instead, they are recognized as opportunities, as moments where the fire within can grow stronger, where resilience can deepen, and where the individual can continue to evolve. In this way, pain becomes not just something to endure, but something to embrace, a powerful force that, when understood and harnessed, has the ability to shape a stronger, more capable, and more resilient self. Rebuilding yourself after pain or failure does not begin with a dramatic moment of transformation, but with a quiet recognition that something within has changed and cannot return to what it once was. The collapse that came before may have felt overwhelming, leaving behind confusion, doubt, and a sense of loss that is difficult to define. In the aftermath, there is often a silence, a space where the noise of struggle has faded but clarity has not yet arrived. This space can feel uncomfortable, even unsettling, because it forces a person to face themselves without distraction or illusion. Yet it is within this very space that rebuilding begins, not by immediately fixing everything, but by allowing what has been broken to be understood. Recovery is not about erasing the past or pretending the pain did not happen, it is about acknowledging its impact and choosing to move forward with that awareness. Psychological insight suggests that after periods of intense stress or failure, the mind requires time to process and reorganize, to make sense of what has occurred before it can begin to grow again. This phase, though often overlooked, is essential, as it creates the foundation upon which true resilience is built. It teaches patience, acceptance, and the understanding that strength is not about avoiding collapse, but about learning how to rise from it with greater clarity and intention. As the process of recovery unfolds, adaptation becomes the next step, where the individual begins to adjust to a new version of themselves shaped by experience. Pain has a way of changing perspectives, altering priorities, and revealing truths that were previously hidden. What once seemed important may no longer hold the same value, and what was once ignored may now demand attention. This shift can feel disorienting at first, as it challenges old habits and familiar ways of thinking. However, it also creates an opportunity to build something more aligned with one's deeper needs and values. Adaptation involves letting go of patterns that no longer serve a purpose and replacing them with behaviors that support growth and stability. This is not an instant process, but a gradual one, requiring consistent effort and self-awareness. Small habit changes play a significant role here, as they provide structure and direction during a time when everything may feel uncertain. Simple actions, such as establishing a daily routine, prioritizing rest, or setting achievable goals, can create a sense of control and progress. These small steps may seem insignificant on their own, but over time, they accumulate, forming the building blocks of a stronger, more stable foundation. Mindset plays a critical role in this rebuilding process, as the way a person interprets their experience directly influences how they move forward. After failure or pain, it is common for negative thoughts to take hold, creating narratives of self-doubt, regret, or hopelessness. These thoughts can become barriers to growth if left unchallenged, reinforcing the belief that progress is not possible. Shifting this mindset does not mean ignoring reality or forcing positivity, but rather developing a more balanced and constructive perspective. It involves recognizing that failure is not a final outcome, but a part of the learning process, and that pain, while difficult, carries valuable lessons. Cognitive psychology highlights the importance of reframing, where individuals learn to interpret experiences in ways that promote resilience rather than defeat. This might involve viewing setbacks as opportunities to learn, or understanding that mistakes provide insight into what needs to change. Over time, this shift in thinking reduces the emotional weight of past experiences, making it easier to move forward without being held back by them. It creates a sense of possibility, a belief that growth is achievable even after significant challenges. Persistence is the force that sustains this entire process, as rebuilding is rarely a straight or predictable path. There will be moments of progress followed by setbacks, days where motivation feels strong and others where it feels absent. This inconsistency is a natural part of growth, not a sign that something is wrong. The key is to continue moving forward, even when progress feels slow or uncertain. Persistence is not about constant effort at maximum intensity, but about maintaining commitment over time, adjusting when necessary, and refusing to give up entirely. Practical strategies can support this, such as breaking larger goals into smaller, manageable steps, celebrating incremental progress, and creating systems that make consistency easier. Surrounding oneself with supportive influences, whether through relationships or environments that encourage growth, can also provide motivation and accountability. It is important to recognize that rebuilding strength is not about returning to a previous state, but about creating something new, something that incorporates the lessons learned through hardship. This perspective shifts the focus from what was lost to what can be gained, reinforcing the idea that progress is always possible, even if it takes time. In the end, rising through the ashes is not a single moment of triumph, but a continuous process of growth, adaptation, and self-discovery. It is about learning to carry the past without being defined by it, to use experience as a source of wisdom rather than a burden. The strength that emerges from this process is different from the strength that existed before, as it is built on understanding, resilience, and the ability to navigate difficulty with greater awareness. This new strength does not rely on the absence of challenges, but on the confidence that challenges can be faced and overcome. It allows a person to move forward with a sense of purpose, knowing that even in moments of struggle, there is the potential for growth. Over time, the pain that once felt overwhelming becomes part of a larger story, one that includes not only difficulty, but also transformation and renewal. This is the essence of rebuilding, not just recovering from what has happened, but evolving because of it, creating a version of oneself that is not only stronger, but more grounded, more aware, and more capable of facing whatever comes next with quiet determination and enduring hope. Scars are often misunderstood as marks of damage, reminders of what went wrong, yet in truth they are evidence of something far more meaningful, the mind's ability to endure, to adapt, and to carry forward what it has learned. When pain first occurs, it feels raw and immediate, overwhelming in its intensity, leaving little room for reflection or understanding. In those moments, the focus is survival, simply getting through the experience without breaking apart completely. But as time passes and the intensity softens, what remains is not just the memory of pain, but the imprint it leaves behind. This imprint, much like a scar, holds information, lessons encoded through experience rather than theory. It represents the transition from feeling to understanding, from reaction to awareness. The mind begins to revisit these moments, not with the same emotional charge, but with a growing sense of curiosity and insight. This process of reflection transforms what was once overwhelming into something that can be observed and learned from. It reveals patterns, connections, and truths that were not visible in the moment of suffering. In this way, scars are not simply remnants of the past, but guides that help navigate the future, carrying within them the wisdom gained through lived experience. Memory plays a crucial role in shaping this transformation, as it acts as the bridge between past experiences and present awareness. The way the mind stores and revisits painful events determines whether those experiences become sources of growth or sources of limitation. When left unexamined, painful memories can reinforce fear, hesitation, and self-doubt, creating patterns that repeat themselves over time. However, when approached with reflection and intention, those same memories can become valuable tools for understanding and change. Psychological research suggests that the brain continuously reshapes memories each time they are recalled, meaning that the meaning attached to an experience is not fixed, but can evolve. This creates an opportunity to reinterpret past events, to see them not only as moments of pain, but as moments of learning. A mistake that once felt like failure can be understood as feedback, revealing what did not work and why. A difficult experience that once seemed meaningless can be seen as a turning point that influenced future decisions. This shift in perspective does not erase the pain, but it changes its role, allowing it to contribute to growth rather than hold a person back. Through this process, memory becomes not just a record of the past, but a resource for building a more informed and intentional future. Experience, especially when it involves hardship, has a way of shaping the way a person thinks, reacts, and makes decisions. It introduces a depth of understanding that cannot be gained through observation alone, as it is rooted in direct engagement with reality. When someone has faced difficulty, they begin to recognize subtle signs and patterns that others might overlook, developing an intuitive sense of what to expect and how to respond. This is where wisdom begins to take form, not as abstract knowledge, but as practical insight grounded in real-life situations. Mistakes, in particular, play a significant role in this process, as they provide clear and immediate feedback about actions and consequences. While mistakes can be painful and difficult to accept, they offer valuable lessons that guide future behavior. A person who reflects on their mistakes learns to identify what led to them, what could have been done differently, and how similar situations can be approached with greater awareness in the future. This process strengthens decision-making, as it replaces impulsive reactions with thoughtful consideration. Over time, these accumulated experiences create a framework for navigating life with greater clarity, reducing the likelihood of repeating the same patterns and increasing the ability to respond effectively to new challenges. Emotional growth is another outcome of this transformation, as the process of reflecting on pain and learning from it deepens a person's understanding of themselves and others. When emotions are experienced and processed rather than avoided, they reveal important information about needs, values, and boundaries. A person begins to recognize how certain situations affect them, what triggers their reactions, and how they can respond in ways that align with their well-being. This awareness extends beyond the self, fostering empathy and compassion for others, as personal experiences of pain create a deeper understanding of the struggles that others may face. Emotional intelligence develops through this process, allowing individuals to navigate complex situations with greater sensitivity and control. They become more attuned to their own feelings, more capable of managing them, and more understanding of the emotions of those around them. This growth is not instantaneous, but gradual, built through repeated reflection and the willingness to learn from experience. It transforms the way relationships are approached, decisions are made, and challenges are faced, creating a more balanced and thoughtful way of engaging with the world. In the end, the transformation of wounds into wisdom is not about forgetting what has happened, but about integrating those experiences into a broader understanding of life. It is about recognizing that pain, while difficult, carries within it the potential for growth, insight, and change. The scars that remain are not signs of weakness, but markers of resilience, evidence that something was faced, endured, and ultimately learned from. They serve as reminders of the journey, of the challenges that were overcome, and of the strength that was developed along the way. This perspective allows a person to move forward with greater confidence, knowing that even in moments of difficulty, there is the potential for learning and growth. It shifts the focus from avoiding pain to understanding it, from fearing mistakes to learning from them. In doing so, it creates a sense of continuity, where past experiences inform present choices and shape future possibilities. The wisdom gained through this process becomes a guiding force, helping to navigate life with greater clarity, intention, and resilience, turning what was once a source of pain into a foundation for strength and understanding. There comes a moment, often quiet and almost unnoticeable at first, when survival is no longer enough, when simply getting through the day begins to feel like a limitation rather than an achievement. Survival mode is necessary in times of intense pain or crisis, as it allows the mind and body to conserve energy, to focus only on what is essential, and to endure what feels overwhelming. In this state, thoughts are narrowed, emotions are suppressed, and actions are driven by immediate need rather than long-term intention. It is a state of protection, not of expansion. But over time, what once served as a shield can become a barrier, preventing growth, limiting potential, and keeping a person confined within the patterns formed during difficult moments. The shift from surviving to growing begins when awareness enters this space, when a person starts to recognize that they are no longer in the same place of danger, yet they continue to operate as if they are. This realization can feel unsettling, as it requires letting go of familiar coping mechanisms that once provided safety. However, it also opens the door to possibility, to the understanding that life can be more than endurance, that it can involve exploration, learning, and transformation. This shift is not about rejecting survival, but about building upon it, using the strength developed during hardship as a foundation for something greater, something that moves beyond merely existing toward actively evolving. Perspective plays a central role in this transformation, as the way a person interprets their experiences determines whether they remain stuck or begin to grow. In survival mode, the focus is often on avoiding pain, minimizing risk, and maintaining stability at all costs. This perspective, while protective, can also limit opportunities for growth, as it discourages taking chances or stepping outside of what feels safe. Shifting this perspective involves learning to see challenges not solely as threats, but as opportunities for learning and development. This does not mean ignoring the reality of difficulty or pretending that pain does not exist, but rather expanding the lens through which it is viewed. Psychological research on mindset suggests that individuals who adopt a growth-oriented perspective are more likely to embrace challenges, persist through obstacles, and learn from setbacks. This shift begins with small changes in thought, questioning automatic assumptions, and reframing experiences in ways that highlight potential rather than limitation. For example, a setback can be seen not as a confirmation of failure, but as feedback that provides insight into what needs to be adjusted. Over time, this new perspective reduces fear and increases confidence, as the individual begins to trust their ability to adapt and learn, rather than simply survive. Behavioral shifts naturally follow changes in perspective, as the way a person thinks influences the way they act. Moving from survival to growth requires intentional action, even when it feels uncomfortable or uncertain. In survival mode, behavior is often reactive, driven by habit and immediate need, but growth requires a more proactive approach, one that involves setting goals, creating structure, and taking consistent steps toward improvement. This does not require dramatic changes, but rather small, deliberate actions that build momentum over time. Establishing routines that support well-being, such as regular exercise, mindful reflection, or skill development, can create a sense of stability while also encouraging progress. Breaking larger goals into manageable steps helps to reduce overwhelm and makes growth feel achievable. It is also important to gradually step outside of comfort zones, as growth cannot occur without some level of discomfort. Each small step taken in this direction reinforces the belief that change is possible, gradually replacing patterns of avoidance with patterns of engagement. Over time, these behavioral changes reshape habits, creating a new way of living that is oriented toward growth rather than mere survival. Emotional development is another key aspect of this shift, as moving beyond survival requires a deeper understanding and acceptance of one's emotional experiences. In survival mode, emotions are often suppressed or ignored, as there is little capacity to process them fully. However, growth involves bringing these emotions into awareness, understanding their origins, and learning how to respond to them in healthy ways. This process requires patience and self-compassion, as it can be challenging to face emotions that have been avoided for a long time. Developing emotional intelligence allows a person to recognize patterns, manage reactions, and communicate more effectively, both with themselves and with others. It also creates a greater sense of inner stability, as emotions are no longer seen as threats, but as signals that provide valuable information. Practical approaches such as journaling, mindfulness, and open communication can support this development, creating space for reflection and understanding. Over time, this emotional awareness reduces reactivity and increases resilience, allowing the individual to navigate challenges with greater clarity and balance. It transforms the relationship with emotions from one of avoidance to one of understanding, creating a foundation for continued growth. Moving forward from survival to growth is not a single decision, but a continuous process of choosing to engage with life in a more intentional and expansive way. It involves recognizing when old patterns of thinking and behavior arise and consciously deciding to respond differently. This process requires persistence, as change does not happen instantly, and there will be moments of doubt and difficulty along the way. However, each step forward, no matter how small, reinforces the shift, gradually creating a new way of being. Surrounding oneself with supportive influences, seeking out opportunities for learning, and maintaining a focus on long-term goals can help sustain this progress. It is also important to celebrate growth, to acknowledge the progress that has been made, and to recognize the strength that has developed through past experiences. This shift ultimately leads to a more fulfilling and meaningful life, where challenges are not merely endured, but used as opportunities for growth and transformation. In this space, the individual is no longer defined by what they have survived, but by how they have chosen to grow, turning past pain into a source of strength, wisdom, and ongoing development. Becoming unshakable is not the result of a single powerful moment, but the outcome of countless smaller battles endured in silence, where a person chooses to continue even when nothing feels certain. Strength is not born in comfort, because comfort rarely demands anything beyond routine existence. It is forged in struggle, where the mind is forced to adapt, to endure pressure, and to find stability in instability. Each challenge a person faces becomes a form of training, whether they recognize it or not, shaping their emotional responses, refining their thinking, and strengthening their ability to remain steady under pressure. At first, struggles feel disruptive, as if they are breaking something within, but over time they begin to build something far more durable than what existed before. Psychological understanding of resilience shows that repeated exposure to manageable levels of stress can increase an individual's capacity to cope with future challenges, a process often described as stress adaptation. This does not mean that pain becomes easier in an immediate sense, but that the mind learns it can survive difficulty without collapsing under it. In this way, each struggle becomes a silent instructor, teaching endurance, awareness, and control, gradually transforming vulnerability into stability and uncertainty into grounded strength. Discipline is one of the foundational elements that emerges from repeated struggle, not as a forced behavior, but as a learned necessity. When life becomes unpredictable or demanding, relying on motivation alone is no longer enough. Consistency becomes the only reliable structure. Discipline begins when a person chooses to act despite emotional resistance, when they continue moving forward even when progress feels slow or invisible. This repeated act of showing up, especially in difficult circumstances, rewires the mind to prioritize action over hesitation. Over time, discipline shifts from something external to something internal, becoming part of a person's identity rather than just a behavior. Small actions, repeated consistently, begin to create momentum, and that momentum builds a sense of control even in uncertain conditions. Whether it is maintaining daily routines, continuing to work toward goals during emotional difficulty, or simply refusing to abandon self-improvement, these actions accumulate into a foundation of reliability within oneself. This foundation becomes essential in moments of pressure, as it provides structure when emotions fluctuate and circumstances become unstable. Discipline, once developed through struggle, becomes a stabilizing force that keeps a person anchored even when everything else feels uncertain. Mental toughness is not the absence of emotion or difficulty, but the ability to remain functional and focused despite them. It is developed gradually through repeated exposure to situations that challenge comfort zones and test emotional limits. Each time a person faces hardship and chooses not to give up, their mental resilience strengthens slightly, even if the change is not immediately noticeable. Over time, this builds a pattern of endurance, where challenges that once felt overwhelming begin to feel manageable, not because they are easier, but because the individual has grown stronger. Neuroscience supports the idea that the brain adapts through repeated experience, forming neural pathways that reinforce learned responses, including emotional regulation and problem-solving under pressure. This means that mental toughness is not fixed, it is built through repetition and experience. In real life, this can be seen in individuals who continue to perform under stress, who maintain clarity during crises, or who recover more quickly from setbacks than they did in the past. Their strength is not accidental, but developed through consistent exposure to difficulty and a conscious or unconscious decision to keep going despite discomfort. Mental toughness, in this sense, becomes a skill shaped by experience, refined through repetition, and strengthened by every challenge endured without surrender. Consistency is what transforms temporary effort into lasting strength, and it is often developed in the quietest moments of struggle. When life is difficult, it becomes tempting to stop, to pause growth, or to wait for better conditions, but true strength is built when action continues regardless of circumstances. Consistency does not require perfection, it requires persistence, the willingness to return to effort even after setbacks or emotional fatigue. This repeated return to action creates a sense of stability within the self, reinforcing the idea that progress is not dependent on feeling motivated, but on continuing regardless of emotional state. Over time, this builds trust in oneself, as actions begin to align with intentions even under pressure. Small, consistent efforts such as maintaining routines, practicing self-reflection, or continuing personal goals despite difficulty gradually reshape identity. Instead of seeing oneself as someone who struggles to cope, the individual begins to see themselves as someone who persists. This shift in self-perception is powerful, as it influences future behavior, making it more likely that consistency will continue even in new challenges. In this way, strength is not created through intensity alone, but through the steady accumulation of repeated effort over time. Consistency is what transforms temporary effort into lasting strength, and it is often developed in the quietest moments of struggle. When life is difficult, it becomes tempting to stop, to pause growth, or to wait for better conditions, but true strength is built when action continues regardless of circumstances. Consistency does not require perfection, it requires persistence, the willingness to return to effort even after setbacks or emotional fatigue. This repeated return to action creates a sense of stability within the self, reinforcing the idea that progress is not dependent on feeling motivated, but on continuing regardless of emotional state. Over time, this builds trust in oneself, as actions begin to align with intentions even under pressure. Small, consistent efforts such as maintaining routines, practicing self-reflection, or continuing personal goals despite difficulty gradually reshape identity. Instead of seeing oneself as someone who struggles to cope, the individual begins to see themselves as someone who persists. This shift in self-perception is powerful, as it influences future behavior, making it more likely that consistency will continue even in new challenges. In this way, strength is not created through intensity alone, but through the steady accumulation of repeated effort over time. There is a point in every journey through pain where something begins to shift quietly within, not as a sudden change, but as a gradual awakening that redefines how suffering is understood. What once felt like an endless weight slowly starts to reveal a different dimension, one where pain is no longer only an experience of breaking down, but also a process of becoming. Across time, through silence, reflection, resistance, acceptance, and rebuilding, the human mind learns to reinterpret what it once feared. The same experiences that once caused confusion and collapse begin to form a pattern of understanding. Pain, when seen through the lens of awareness, is no longer just an interruption in life, it becomes part of life's instruction. It teaches patience when everything demands urgency, clarity when emotions cloud judgment, and resilience when everything feels uncertain. The journey does not erase suffering, but it reshapes its meaning. Instead of being something that only takes away, it becomes something that also builds. This transformation is not immediate, nor is it easy, but it is deeply human. It reflects the mind's ability to adapt, to evolve, and to find strength in places that once felt like only weakness. In this way, the beginning of strength is not the absence of pain, but the moment pain is finally understood rather than feared. As this understanding deepens, the fragmented lessons of earlier struggles begin to connect into a larger picture, revealing how each stage of suffering contributed to inner development. The silent beginnings of ignored emotions, the breaking points of emotional overload, the storms of resistance, and the slow process of rebuilding all become parts of a single continuum rather than isolated events. Psychology suggests that meaning-making is essential to emotional recovery, as the mind seeks coherence in experiences that once felt chaotic. When a person begins to reflect on their pain with distance and awareness, they start to see patterns that were invisible in the moment of struggle. They recognize how avoidance intensified suffering, how acceptance reduced inner conflict, how reflection turned memory into wisdom, and how persistence rebuilt stability from collapse. These realizations do not remove the past, but they transform its influence. Instead of being trapped within experiences, the individual begins to move through them with understanding. This shift creates emotional clarity, where confusion is replaced by insight and helplessness is replaced by awareness of growth. It becomes clear that pain was never only destruction, it was also a teacher shaping emotional intelligence, discipline, and inner strength in ways that comfort never could. From this clarity emerges a powerful form of growth, one that is not dependent on external circumstances but rooted deeply within the self. Growth after pain is not loud or dramatic, it is often quiet, seen in subtle changes in thought, behavior, and emotional response. A person begins to react differently, not because life has become easier, but because they have become more aware. Triggers that once caused overwhelm are now met with reflection. Challenges that once felt like endings are now seen as transitions. Decisions become more intentional, shaped by lessons rather than impulses. This is where strength begins to stabilize, not as something temporary, but as a developed capacity to navigate life with greater balance. Emotional maturity grows as understanding replaces reactivity, and resilience strengthens as experience replaces uncertainty. The individual learns that they are not defined by the moments that broke them, but by how they responded afterward. Each scar, each memory, each difficult chapter becomes integrated into a stronger sense of identity. This identity is no longer fragile or reactive, it is grounded, aware, and capable of holding both pain and purpose at the same time. Growth, in this sense, becomes the quiet proof that nothing experienced was wasted. Moving forward with this strength does not mean forgetting the past, nor does it mean denying the depth of what was felt. Instead, it means carrying those experiences differently, with awareness instead of resistance, and with purpose instead of confusion. The mind no longer sees pain as something to escape from at all costs, but as something that has already contributed to survival and development. This shift allows for forward movement that is not forced, but natural. Life begins to open again, not because pain disappears, but because its control weakens. New goals feel possible, new perspectives become accessible, and new emotional space is created where fear once dominated. Practical changes support this transition: small habits that reinforce stability, mindful awareness that prevents old patterns from taking over, and consistent action that builds trust in one's ability to continue growing. Even setbacks no longer carry the same finality they once did, because experience has taught that recovery is always possible. In this space, strength is not about never falling again, but about knowing how to rise each time with deeper understanding. The future is no longer shaped by avoidance of pain, but by the wisdom gained through it. And so, everything comes together in a final realization that reshapes the meaning of the entire journey: pain was never separate from strength. It was the very process through which strength was formed. What once felt like breaking was actually becoming, what once felt like loss was actually transformation, and what once felt like the end was actually the beginning of a deeper version of self. The human spirit does not grow in silence or ease, it grows in confrontation, in endurance, and in the quiet decision to continue even when nothing feels certain. Every moment of suffering carried within it a hidden direction, pointing toward resilience, awareness, and inner clarity. And now, looking back, the path reveals itself not as a series of random struggles, but as a continuous shaping of character and depth. The pain that once demanded escape has become the foundation of understanding. The strength that now exists was not given, but forged through experience, refined through reflection, and solidified through persistence. And as this realization settles fully, it leaves behind a quiet but powerful truth: within every wound lived the seed of wisdom, and within every moment of pain, the quiet beginning of strength that was always meant to rise.